So everyone grab your beverages. I would like to introduce Dr. Mike Murray. Those of you know him from his long career, probably with Marielle, but he has embarked many years ago on a new career, which I'm very excited for him to talk to you about today. And he is going to also walk us through the spectrum of leadership. So Mike, it is all yours.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you everyone for joining. I see some familiar faces and some new faces. So hello to everybody. So I get to lead the toast. And you know, a toast is an invitation to celebrate. And so what I would like to do is invite each of you to celebrate yourselves as leaders. So cheers.
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 And I'm going to start my timer here just so I can pay attention if I'm going too fast or slow. So just a real quick background on me. Some of you know me, most of you I think don't. I am a veterinarian for 37 years. I started out in private practice, then I went and did a residency in large animal medicine, went on to work in an academic equine referral hospital. So I was a professor and all that stuff. And then I made the jump to the dark side, the industry, and I was with Marielle/BI for 15 years. And this year I've embarked on a new phase of my journey, which is to start my own coaching and consulting business. And that gives me great pleasure because at this point in my life, I really am about helping others be successful. And I just love doing that. And so what I'm going to be talking about and discussing with you today is leadership. And first, you know, what are our concepts of leadership? Second, what's our concept of ourselves as leaders? And then I'll get into what the spectrum of leadership is all about. So with that, to start with then, thinking about what we think leaders are, who a leader is, I will ask for some volunteers to complete this sentence. A leader is someone who blank. How do you complete that sentence? Not all at once.
Influences. Takes responsibility.
Okay.
And Ellen, I think you also said something.
Influences.
Okay.
Okay.
They elevate others.
Elevate others.
Dreams.
Ooh.
Leader is someone who dreams.
Serves others.
Serves others. Okay. Great. So different concepts of leadership. And, you know, we hear about leadership a lot now. It's become kind of a buzzword. It's kind of like innovation. And for someone who's a leadership and innovation coach, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, but it's definitely a thing. And so in the media, whether it be social media, the internet, TV, podcasts, lots of people talking about what leadership is from, you know, their ideal of what leadership is. And we hear lots of different things. So because of that, I mean, we might even be confused about what leadership is. We heard different ideas amongst this group here. Traditional concepts of leadership do tend to be about responsibility or who's in charge. Also, and Catherine and I were talking about this last week, it's, you know, we have the concept as people who are making a big impact out there. And all of that is true, and it's more. So it's not restricted to just that. So the idea is we have all these different inputs about what leadership is, and that could get us to believe that, well, maybe that doesn't sound like me. Maybe I don't want all that responsibility. Maybe I don't want to be in charge. I don't want to run the company. I don't want to be a department head. I mean, when I was in university, that was kind of like the next thing for me was, you know, administration, department head, and I didn't want to do that. Even in business, I wasn't really excited about, oh, I want to be head of some group and manage a bunch of people. And that's just kind of like my personality type is that's not what floats my boat. So for a while in my own life, I was really doubting my own leadership potential because, you know, who I am and what really I like to do didn't seem to fit that traditional concept. And I think with a lot of people, perhaps we can feel like we don't have that talent, we don't have that personality type, we weren't born leaders. And so we might opt out of believing that we are leaders. And so a few years ago, actually, in my coaching training program, I came upon a definition which was really impactful for me because it just opened the door of my own leadership potential. And so the definition of leadership that really kind of changed the way I saw myself in that context is a leader is the person in an interaction who has the greater influence. I heard someone say influences, leader is someone who influences. So again, a leader is the person in an interaction who knowingly or unknowingly has the greater influence. And if you think about that, that means we have opportunities to be leaders throughout the entire day, because we're always in interactions with other people. It can be at work, it could be at home, it can be with our kids, it can be with our colleagues. We have these interactions constantly. So what I'd like to do is invite you and ask you to think of and share with others opportunities you've had for leadership in the last day. Using that definition of it's simply the person who has the greater influence in an interaction. An interaction with your kids, an interaction with a colleague, an interaction with a client, a customer, someone in the exam room, anybody.
I think it's really interesting because it can morph even in the process of the interaction. You may start off with less influence and then find yourself as you're in a discussion finding that you actually have more influence than you thought you had, or you have information that you provide in the interaction that it turns out, I do have more influence because I have more information or knowledge or something like that, which is, it's an interesting idea to think about in everyday interactions, because I do think it changes almost within the interaction sometimes.
Sure. And what I'm hearing is it is very dynamic. And it is very dynamic. So it's not just, I'm in charge, you do what I say, or here's our vision, our strategy for how we're going to be the number one, whatever we want to be number one in. It's actually a highly dynamic process. And as we get into the spectrum, I'll talk more about what that can look like along the spectrum. So really appreciate that comment. Who else? What situation did you have that you had the opportunity to be a leader, an interaction, just in the last 4 hours?
I think I kind of agree with Liz that it's, I have multitude of managers that are right underneath me, and then obviously they manage a lot of staff. We have about 250 staff members total, and so it's always changing. So I could walk out of my office and engage in a conversation where someone's asking me for information or how to handle a situation, whether it be a client concern or a certain situation with a client of how to deal with a certain situation. It never changes, and they may provide me information and I'm taking it back and plugging it into my head and going, okay, I'm going to keep that little tidbit of information for the next interaction that I come along with. And then I walk downstairs and I encounter one of my managers and I'm giving them guidance for the next thing that we talk about, or we're bouncing ideas off each other for a future meeting or a future project that we're working on, or something where the clinic's trying to go towards. So it's,
So let me ask you, Chris, of those 250 staff members, how many of them do you consider to be leaders?
well, I wish the number was higher. I probably have maybe 20 who I really depend on, who make our operation flow smoothly. And I don't include the doctors in that. We have.
So I would just kind of give back to you the idea that actually all 250 of them are leaders, because they're all in interactions and they all have the opportunity to have influence in that interaction. And that's kind of what I'm really getting at in this discussion, is to really think about how everybody, each and every one of us can be a leader. And when you have such a huge operation like you have, how you can actually be not only thinking of all of them as leaders, but then helping them see themselves as leaders in the interactions in which they have with each other, with your clients, and it goes down the line. So thank you. And so we have all these leadership opportunities. So the question is, how do we show up as a leader? So we can look at it really almost from a bipolar standpoint. Are we focused on what's wrong, or are we focused on what's possible? So when we're focused on what's wrong, we are in a stress mindset. And when we're focused on what's possible, we're in what I call the success mindset. And they are physiologically entirely different. I mean, our stress response is a very simple rapid fire pathway. I mean, we can be triggered in a stress response in nanoseconds, 73 to be precise in one study. So 73 nanos, which is faster than our brain can say, stop saying those words you're saying, or whatever. I mean, we react that quickly. The success mindset is involving higher centers of the brain. And actually, when we're in a stress response, it shuts down the parts of our brain that are associated with the success mindset. The stress mindset is limiting. I mean, it really is, it's the fight or flight response, right? And we only can see this much because we don't have time to think about all this other stuff. Whereas the success mindset is limitless. So the spectrum of leadership really spans this spectrum of stress responses and mindset to success mindset. And if we look at the opposite ends of the poles, if you will, or of the spectrum, when we are in a heaviest stress response, essentially we believe that we don't matter. We're not good enough, and that feels rotten. When we're at the opposite end of our success mindset, we have non-judgment, particularly about ourselves. And so we feel free to be who we are, and we really like who we are. So those are kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum. Now, in the middle, if we start down on the stress response, what does that look like? It looks like avoiding what's stressing us. Procrastinating. I'm a pretty good procrastinator. Like when things like right now, we're getting the whole house painted and ready to move. We're moving out to be south of where Jeff is. We'll be in Tucson. And the thing is stressing me out. And so I am avoiding, going into that closet and pulling everything out. We feel like we don't have control. And so as we move up the spectrum, then is when we try to take control forcefully. We blame others. We get angry. We get frustrated. We coerce. And so it's very forceful. As we move up the spectrum, rather than blaming, we take responsibility. And we try to get things done. This is the where we need to do things. We need to see the appointments, even when the waiting room's all backed up. Oh my God, I need to do this. I need to get that report written. I need to get my objectives done. I need to meet my objectives. So it's, I need to, or you need to. As we move further up, it's, I want to help you, but I want to help you according to what I know. And in fact, that's what we were taught in veterinary school, isn't it? We get all this information, and then we go in the exam room and say, well, Mrs. Jones, I'm the expert. We don't say it, but that's kind of how we come off. I'm the expert, and so this is what's best for Trixie, and that's what you're going to do, right? And then when Mrs. Jones says, well, I read on the internet, then we can just do a deep dive down into our stress response. And then that's where our interaction with Mrs. Jones is coming from that standpoint or that part of the spectrum. So to Liz's comment, yeah, it's really dynamic. Even in the exam room, we can go from, I really want to help to, she just doesn't appreciate, or, that damn Dr. Google again. Now, where we kind of take the leap, the quantum leap into the success mindset, is when we are looking at more perspectives. We're seeking more perspectives. Because when we get more perspectives, we see more possibilities. And when we see more possibilities, we create more opportunities. We can empower others. This is where trust and collaboration happens. And so the success mindset, as we move up that spectrum, and if we're leading from a success mindset, that's where we empower others to be successful. Now, books and blogs and lectures on leadership tend to focus on that part of the leadership spectrum because we spend most of our time in a stress response. And a lot of the people we know as leaders are leading from a stress response. And a lot of it makes sense because they may be in a role that they're not comfortable with, or they might feel that they're not good enough, even though they're in that role. And so their stress response is going to come out. So we see that all the time, which is why, again, all the experts try to talk about the other stuff, the empowering, the empathy and all that. But in fact, all along that spectrum is where we can lead. Sometimes we have to take control. Sometimes we have to hold people accountable. Sometimes we have to get people to get things done. And Chris, who runs this huge practice, knows that. I mean, you just can't be, brainstorming with sticky notes all day long. But sometimes you should probably brainstorm with sticky notes with people because that helps elevate their mindset into the success mindset. So let me kind of take a pause right there and get your thoughts, your feedback on what I've mentioned about this spectrum and how you see that working.
Well, I'll jump in really quick. I've been dealing on a caregiver perspective this last week. So even though while we're talking about leadership and potentially the professional environment, that entire spectrum of what you've been talking about from not only from us as caregivers, but then also with my dad, literally the spectrum of what happens there is crazy. And when you said the nanoseconds, I wrote that one down because one of my big things that I do want to, I hope that we can talk about that might be tomorrow is, where you are trying to be helpful, you are trying to do this, but then the other person is in that very responsive stress scenario and how to get them to pivot out of it because they're stressing me out. It's causing me to go the opposite direction. So that may be for tomorrow, but that is something as you've been talking, I've been thinking about mine wasn't four hours ago. Mine's been for the last 5 days, but it's been a very interesting, as you're putting into context, but I'll let others jump in.
So I just want to comment on the caregiving thing because several years ago, I was from a distance having to take care of a father with heart failure and a mother with dementia and going up to Minnesota in this situation. And I was trying to get them out of the house. They wouldn't go, all of that. And I just exploded. I finally said, "You're not doing what you're supposed to do." And then I caught myself mid-sentence. I just stopped. And I let go of trying to control the situation. And I just, whatever happens, happens here. And I commented on something Jeff wrote on LinkedIn about just kind of trusting. And everything that was supposed to happen, happened. And now that included my father passing away. But at that time he passed away, a place opened up at a nursing home for my mom that had been closed off for a year. It's that week it opened up and I got her in there. So it kind of is amazing if you kind of just, if you have the awareness of the spectrum, if you understand where you are, there's not a right or wrong, by the way. It's about the situation. And if you see what the situation really would benefit from most, you can adjust where you are on that spectrum, number one. And to your point, tomorrow what we'll talk about is how you can then help others adjust along that spectrum. And that's where the real secret sauce of leadership comes from.
Any others want to jump in?
I'll jump in. I have gone through for the past couple of years, something that Catherine and Mike have gone through is taking care of my mother-in-law, who just recently passed. And I think that leadership can be too, realizing that you're in a situation that you're not necessarily supported, and having enough guts to take yourself out of it and prove to others that there is something else out there and that you can be happy.
Yeah. And you know, in that situation, there's times when you really will be sort of in that stress side of the spectrum and even feeling not good enough. I don't matter. There's nothing I can do here. And being able to accept that actually in that moment can be very powerful, because that's when you can then go to the next phase of maybe actually getting pissed about it, and then moving along that spectrum. But allowing yourself to be where you are, and then, you know, saying, is this what serves me right now? If the answer is no, it says, well, what would serve me better? What are some other ways I can see this situation? But it might be, yes, this is exactly what serves me right now.
I have a question for you, Mike.
Yes.
I'm reflecting back, like Monday, I was in the lower levels of this spectrum you've talked about, and today I'm in a different place, but I'm, you know, so I guess one comment is it's a work in progress for all of us. We never like arrive. We're always kind of practicing, you know, to get to those higher levels. But I'm wondering what kinds of disciplines or practices do you recommend to help us all develop the awareness we need to know where we're at and have a different choice? I mean, what things work for you maybe that you would recommend that others consider?
Well, to your point, I mean, we all have sort of the path that we're on and things that we find work. What worked really well for me and still works, and it's what I use in my own coaching, and I think I've shared it with you, is the levels of engagement framework, which is based on the energy leadership principles that Bruce Schneider, who founded the IPEC program, developed. And what I like about that framework is that it's easy to understand, and so I can pretty quickly figure out where I am on this spectrum. And I understand what's going on, and I understand what my other choices are along this spectrum. So rather than it just being this jumble of crazy stuff that's happening, it allows me to understand it better. And it also allows me to not take things as personally. And then it just kind of, it creates that sort of detachment of wanting to just boom, react, right? And by the way, we still all get triggered. I mean, to your point, something, you know, was causing you to go to the lower end of the spectrum. It always happens, but do we need to get stuck there? No. And do we have other options for situations? Yes. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's literally on a daily basis how I'm just thinking along that framework to, okay, is this really what's serving me best right now?
Oh, thank you.
So Mike, you just have a few minutes left. So I want to be sure that before we do the cutoff at the 25-minute mark,
Okay,
that as we're progressing.
all right. Well, I guess what I'll do is talk a little bit about tomorrow, if that's okay, which is really how to kind of put this into action. And so I'll talk a little bit about the difference between who we are and how we are, and how we can use that understanding to show up as leaders in situations. And then I'll go through a scenario and, you know, to show how even in stressful interactions, you know, so the leader is the person with the greater influence in an interaction. Well, a lot of interactions are actually inherently stressful. So how can we be a leader in that situation? And how can we kind of help the other person maybe move a little bit away from the stress side of the spectrum, more towards the success side of the spectrum?
So we're at the 25-minute mark for those of you who have to move on. I love that Martina is working and she is completely walking through the hospital. This is making me so excited because that's exactly what the Bridge Club is supposed to be, where you are, when you have to be there. So I think that's lovely. We do have another 15 minutes or so that we can engage with Dr. Murray. And so please, this is the opportunity for really the open questions, things that you're wanting on your mind, or things you want to make sure that he maybe covers off tomorrow. But we've got about 15 minutes for that conversation. So for those of you who have to drop off, this is your, you can tap out moment. You don't have to say farewell or any of that, but we want to make sure that you guys are all engaged as we move forward.
Mike, you mentioned levels of engagement. Who is it that, where does that information come from? Where might someone be able to find that?
So the levels of engagement specifically is something you can, if you want to connect with me about, I can talk about that. The energy leadership concept, which is where this is based on, there's actually a book called Energy Leadership by Bruce Schneider. And it's a good book because it actually it has sort of a scenario that it goes through in a business environment, but it shows how these different levels can show up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and just a quick note, if you do want to reach out to me, can I, Catherine, give them my email address real quick?
Absolutely.
It's mike.murray@level5coach.com, and level 5 is all spelled out. Level 5 coach is spelled out. mike.murray@level5coach.com. Yeah.
Mike, what would you say? Tomorrow is going to be really interesting because as leaders, we are responsible for moving people from that stress point to the success point. But how do we get ourselves out of those moments when we know we need to move on, but we just are stuck? Because we get so much piled on us, I think, day in and day out, and are so busy trying to help everybody else be wonderful. Sometimes we forget how to teach ourselves how to be wonderful too.
Maybe can you give me some sort of an example?
Well, so I have someone who reports to me who is really fabulous, very talented, but she constantly doesn't see that what she's doing is moving the ball forward unless it is moving the ball forward 50 yards at a time. So when we have our weekly one-on-one conversations, I feel we're always back, at the 2-yard line, and I'm trying to say, but you got the ball down to here, but she's continuously disappointed because it's not further. So then I feel like I'm not doing my best work to support her and have her feel heard and see those little successes. And then I start beating myself up a little bit about what could I have done to better support her? What could I have said to her? How do I rally people around her to recognize what great work she's doing? That's just one almost immediate example.
But that brings up an interesting point, which is that we are constantly creating assumptions about situations. We rarely have a whole lot of information in situations. Mm-hmm. So what we focus on is people's behavior, what they do, what they say, if we're really good, their body language and all that. But we rarely know what the thought was that triggered that behavior. And in fact, sometimes we don't even know what the thought is that triggers our behavior, because that's a thought that created an emotion 40 years ago. And that emotion is stored in our memory banks, and it's right next to the threat center of our brain. And so, boom, it just happens. And so even though if we don't know what we're thinking in that moment, we certainly don't know what other people are thinking. Mm-hmm. And so what do we do in the absence of information? We create it, the assumptions or interpretations. And so the what I'm getting to is it's always good to get more information. And it's kind of what we'll be doing tomorrow, but it's about that cognitive empathy of active listening, of understanding the other person, what's going on. And it's not, well, why did you do that? It's, well, let's talk about this situation. So tell me about, what's going on. And just, sort of using those open-ended questions, the active listening to get more information. Because otherwise all we're doing is making assumptions, and then your assumption was you're not doing good enough as a manager. She may have some assumptions about she's not doing good enough, and it's driving her crazy because she's a perfectionist. I mean, all of that kind of goes hand in hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yep. It does. Anybody else want to share their personal problems? I can't be the only one.
Well, it's really, we're just talking about everyday normal things. And so in Brenda's situation, how you can show up as a leader is to be curious, to really, so tell me, what's going on, and wow, this is great. So what are your thoughts on your work? How's that going? And that is creating an amazing amount of influence, because it's having the other person feel like they're heard. Someone wants to hear about them. We all like to feel like someone wants to hear about us.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the people is like, well, should I come with an agenda? And I'm like, no, this is our time to just talk, to have a conversation about how things are going, where you feel like you've had wins, where you've got what I call the WTFs that need to be addressed, you know, just to talk about ideas we want to move forward to. And it's funny how people, I think, like that agenda format, and they aren't as comfortable just talking back and forth. But so I'm trying to help them practice talking with other people. We'll see where it goes. I'll report in later on and let you know how it goes.
So that's interesting, because an agenda creates some sort of false sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone's coming at the conversation wanting an agenda, that could reflect their own stress mindset.
Good point.
I resemble that argument. I always have an agenda. It's horrible. I do. I've always got like, this has to be covered. And Mike, I've walked into many a meeting with you, and you've had to say, I start diving in, and you've gone, by the way, good morning, Catherine. So it's one of my biggest faults. I just, drive forward. So.
Well, it's not a fault. It's just, it's your way of responding to a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of funny, but I resemble that remark.
Oh, funny.
We had a huge problem with that in our management. We have every Tuesday morning management meeting. And so one of the owners always wanted a structured like layout of how the meeting was going to go and what we're going to talk about. And I'm not that I'm a free for all, no organization kind of person, but I can't operate a meeting like that, because you never know what the topic of conversation is going to be that really needs to be, we need to dive into more. We need to talk about more. And, if you have all these items listed on a sheet of paper, you short-sighted some things that really need to be discussed further. And so we got away from that, thankfully. And our meetings have been much more productive, since then. But I think going back to Mike, I guess what I said when you asked the question to begin was, I said that a leader elevates others. And I think maybe my comment after that maybe went away from that a little bit. That's kind of how I've always approached it. Obviously, I have a few managers that are directly underneath me, and I always try to take the neutral approach to every conversation I have with them. So when they come to me with a problem, I kind of do peel back the onion. I want to know more. Tell me more about and I just kind of keep the neutral approach to it until I need to go one direction or the other with my response. And, they've come back to me before and they're like, I never know how you stay calm. Like, I'm flustered and I want the answer right then and there. And I'm like, I want to give you the answer, but I have to know more before I can give you the answer, because my answer may change based on the information that you give me. And I don't want to just give you that snap reaction right back. But I went to, I guess kind of going the spectrum, I catch myself going from one end to the other, 5 times a day. I'll go from the stress point to the success point when I walk away from a conversation going, okay, that was positive. And then I go right back 5 minutes later to the point of like, there's no way this is going to go the way we want it to go. And it's frustrating. So I always just walk away from the end of the day going, what I followed myself. And I feel like if I can leave the office every day and know that I did something that I could look back and be like, I would follow me in that direction, then I guess that's what you hang your hat on at the end of the day.
So let me share something with you that will help explain why that happens so easily. Which is that I got distracted by something. It's all the uproar in the house happening. So I was doing some workshops with some folks, some scientists last week, and they're all, God, they've got such intense procedures and policies and technical stuff that they got to do. It's really intense stuff. And so they're at a level of engagement. So we'll talk about the engagement levels, level 3, where it's the, need to do this, take responsibility and all that. And that's about 60-70% stress response, that level. And the problem with that is that stress is heavy and it pulls us down. Mm-hmm. So you're more likely to get pulled down to the lower levels towards the end of the stress spectrum than being able to go up to the higher levels. So just that day-to-day, getting stuff done, running a hospital, managing this, seeing patients and being on that hamster wheel, if you will, it's like a car leaning over a cliff. You know, the heaviest part of that car is the engine. The car ain't staying there. It's going to boom, eventually go down, because the heaviest part of the car is going to pull it over the cliff. So that's what's happening in the situation you described. You are getting to those higher levels of engagement in the success mindset, but you're also very busy getting stuff done, having to think about so much of what's going on in your organization that it's so easy to get pulled down. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so the more awareness you can have around that, and find ways of being curious. And I mean, I love the way you talked about, you try to get more information. And if you can do that from a place of curiosity, as much as trying to fix a problem, you might find yourself less apt to, very quickly go into the stress response. Because you can be trying to get information to solve something, fix something that's wrong, or you can be trying to get information to see what other possibilities there are. And different parts of the brain are working when you're doing that. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the neuroscience.
Like that. Curiosity is going to be my new buzzword. We'll try it out tomorrow.
I wrote it down.
Yep. I like that one. And I also too love.
You have the cat now. Be careful with that.
Yeah. I love Christopher's comment. Would I have followed myself today? I'm like, that's brilliant. That's really a good one.
I went to a leadership conference in Denver 2 years ago, and it was a 3-day conference, and it's one of those ones like where you get your like little insights that you take and you grab from it. And that was like day one within the first 2 hours. And that was the first question he presented to us was, at the end of it, I want you to ask the question, would you follow yourself? And I was like, I'm going to take that back and live by that every day.
Yeah.
With my kid and everything that I do and, day to day. So.
Constant reminder to set a good example for others to follow, for sure. I like that. This has been really great. Anybody else have any other comments? Come on, people.
We got about 2 minutes left, and then we want to give a parting shot to Dr. Murray. So anyone have anything else they'd like to share? And it's all yours, Mike. Give your parting shot and promote yourself tomorrow.
Well, I want to thank everyone who joined. I want to say hi to Stacy there. I haven't heard anything from you, but Stacy and I worked together many years ago at Marielle. And Julie, I see Julie there. Yeah, like I said, tomorrow we're going to really talk about how to put this into action, and kind of like what we've been discussing in the last few minutes, but how to be able to not only be aware of where we are on the spectrum, but being aware of where someone else might be and helping move them along. And when we can do that, wow, that's leadership.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Love it. Good stuff.
Very good. Well, everybody, with that, we are at our end. You can go ahead and hang up. Hopefully we'll get to see you again tomorrow. If you are an All Access member, you'll get a copy of this video. If you are not, then unfortunately you do not get a copy of this video, but you can join by going to our website.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, he did. But that's why our business model is based on this human interaction. We believe that it's really important for us in order to connect, engage, learn, and grow as an industry. So hopefully we will see you all tomorrow. So with that in mind, everybody, have a great rest of the day, and cheers to you.
Cheers all.
Thank you.